Addiction manifests as a desire to escape from reality. When the raw experience of life becomes unbearable, a person will often seek refuge in an object of safety, familiarity, and temporary comfort. The objects of addiction, whether substances, activities, or behaviors, they provide these fleeting moments of relief, yet they do not really deliver the lasting fulfillment that our deeper desire systems crave. Instead, they only ever provide a short-term pulse of satisfaction, a temporary escape that very quickly fades. The high, it doesn't last, and soon the craving will always follow the gratification of the high. And this creates this sort of relentless cycle of chasing and attaining only to fall back into longing. Over time we become stuck in this addictive loop and held captive by the very thing that we seek relief from. And as addiction deepens, the brain's reward systems driven by dopamine becomes more and more attuned to this cycle. And what once brought joy, meaning, and connection, they begin to dwindle as the mind singularly focuses upon the addiction object. And as well, with repeated exposure to addictive patterns, there's a cruel tolerance that builds. We need more and more of the addicted object to reach the same high, a phenomenon known as hedonic adaptation. And this misalignment of pleasure and pain, the balance between the two, it eventually leads to a distorting of our sense of fulfillment, making other aspects of life feel empty in comparison to the addiction object. The addiction object, it comes to dominate our thoughts and our emotions, but no amount will ever seem enough. We continue to crave more and more, never really reaching contentment or peace. Many people, they find themselves in a relentless cycle of wanting, striving for a satisfaction, but never truly feeling it. There's no peace in this state, only a constant yearning for something unattainable. To break free of this, one must first recognize the narrowness of this pattern. Addiction gradually consumes one's life, and it will always reach this stage of overshadowing all the other sources of meaning and fulfillment. So overcoming addiction, it starts with recognizing this narrowing. In addiction, behavior and psychology center around the addiction object, leaving little room for anything else. Life contracts around the pursuit, gratification, and craving for the addiction. To counteract this, there therefore must be a conscious and gradual opening, a widening of awareness that includes all the neglected parts of oneself. Now, this process is an expansion of consciousness. It requires acknowledging the cycle, understanding why it began, and recognizing the underlying traumas or pains one might be self-medicating. True healing, it always involves diving deeper into the reasons that led one to seek escape in the first place, often going beyond the self to consider the certain environmental and societal factors that may have played a role. Because you see, addiction is rarely a personal failing. It is often a response to circumstances. We frequently, in our culture, place blame solely on the person struggling with addiction without considering their life context. Many people who face severe stress, isolation, or hardship, they turn to addiction as a coping mechanism. For example, homelessness is a very common cause, a very common situation that leads people to addiction as a means of temporary relief. Therefore, to understand a person's addiction fully, one must look into why they fell into it. This requires empathy, fundamentally. And for those who are suffering from addiction, you need to cultivate a sense of empathy for yourself. And if you've healed for addiction and are in the process of healing, you need to cultivate empathy for your past self. And you should acknowledge the decisions that were made, often from a place of pain or survival. But healing from addiction, it means moving forward. It means cultivating a sense of safety, comfort, and meaning from within. And it involves seeking fulfillment that goes beyond temporary highs. The realization that no short-term escape can provide lasting fulfillment is really key to recovery. And it also involves a deep reflection on the meaningful aspects of life. One has to begin to weigh the value of these things. One has to begin to value the weight of these things, the meaningful aspects, against the cost of addiction. The introspection has to ask, is my life worth sacrificing for this cycle? And I think that true change, it cannot be achieved by the mind alone. The body must also come into alignment. And often it's our bodily cravings, the desires for immediate sense pleasure that drive us towards addiction. These limbic impulses, they pull us into a state of constant seeking, and paradoxically is often physical pain resulting from addiction that can wake us up to the harm that we're causing to ourselves. Pain in this sense is a signal. It's a reminder of misalignment, urging us to reevaluate our path. Addiction, it always has this sort of honeymoon phase where everything feels pleasurable and easy, but this always eventually fades as hedonic adaptation sets in and the high diminishes and life becomes a shadow of what it once was. The pain that comes, whilst challenging, it serves as a critical turning point, and it will prompt you to take a long, hard look at yourself and your direction. And this honest self-reflection, often called shadow work, is essential. It involves a looking inward, a confrontation with the hidden, repressed aspects of oneself. And without this introspection, we remain slaves to our unconscious impulses. And in states of addiction, we are really trapped by our lower desire systems, driven by these deeply ingrained patterns. But really, and I should emphasize this point, in each moment of experience, we have the choice to live according to our higher selves, rather than succumbing to the fleeting desires of our lower self. And the ultimate goal of psychic integration is to bring all the aspects of oneself into alignment so that the body no longer craves illusory fulfillment. And this is not an easy journey. It takes time and effort to heal ingrained patterns. However, the foundation of this healing is self-compassion. One must have empathy for their imperfections, and they must recognize the flaws and the mistakes, and recognize them as simply a part of being human. And as a prominent thinker on this topic has said, Johann Hari, who has written books about this called Lost Connections, he's also written about the drug war at length. He once said that the opposite of addiction is connection. And addiction often arises from a sense of isolation, a lack of community, a void of authentic relationships. And in the absence of genuine connection, one turns to addiction as a substitute for connection, a toxic connection that ultimately brings pain. And real healing, it requires reaching out, forming authentic connections with others, and finding meaning in those relationships. And facing addiction alone, it is incredibly difficult. Support systems like friends, family, community, they play a crucial role in helping someone out of the depths of addiction. But unfortunately, addiction is so often misunderstood and stigmatized in our society, leaving many without the support that they truly need. And when external support is lacking, one is forced to become their own support system. And they're forced to ultimately build a compassionate, loving relationship with themselves. You know, this path to healing, it always begins with unconditional self-acceptance. One must learn to accept who they are and why they've come to this point, and embrace that. Relentless self-criticism, it only creates more pain and it hinders progress. Instead, learn from your mistakes with compassion and understanding for why you made them. Recovery is a journey, it's not a destination. Mistakes will happen, and the path may be challenging, but with patience, empathy, and connection, both within and with others, you can break the cycle and move towards a fulfilling and meaningful life.